Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was the Perfect Shinobi, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. As the battle began to rage down in the arena, two shinobi wearing cages robes, one a pretender and the other legitimate, but both strong and skilled enough to merit such the illustrious title, stood opposite one another atop the highest building overlooking the whole Colosseum. Fitting, Orochimaru mused, that his sensei would be able to see his village's obliteration even as he s at his own student's hand. The serpent man stood with his hands at his sides as he regarded the shrunken huskill that had once been the man renowned over all the hidden villages as Kami no Shinobi, with mocking amusement written without care on his yellow eyes. Sarutobi met his gaze without hesitation. Humor me with one small thing, Orochimaru. Tell me the real reason you've come back. Mere revenge isn't something you would even bother with, neither towards me nor this village. You have long considered such mundane ambitions to be beneath you. Even your voice has grown weary, you've become so very old, sensei. The old man was wrong to a degree, as Orochimaru did have a token interest in settling scores with his aged mentor, and with Konoha on the whole, but was also correct at the same time. There was a much deeper meaning to his return, and the Snake Sannin would not have bothered to take such pains to raise his birth village or to mark a genin or two with his cursed seal without one. The snake man tilted his head and pondered his sensei's question, attempting to decide whether the old man was attempting to stall him until Anbu arrived en masse, Naruto-kun's botched attack notwithstanding. However, the Sound 4 then moved into position and activated the Shishinjin barrier, rendering assistance impossible. The old man's brow creased as he realized that he was trapped, much to Orochimaru's hidden delight. At this point I suppose there can be no harm in enlightening you, old man. Above all else, you see, I abhor stagnation. For too long, these lands have been ever so still and inert, a real rotting corpse. All I want now is to see our shinobi world resurrected to its proper state, plunged into motion once again, and I use Konoha's annihilation to activate this chain reaction. That's all. The Sandaime Hokage closed his tired eyes and shook his head. A sudden wind made the ceremonial robes that the two men wore billow, as did Orochimaru's long hair. Sarutobi seemed to be preparing to battle, as his ex-student could sense his residual chakra saturating the air. A noise akin to a closed thunderbolt diverted the pair's attention, as some overzealous Anbu attempted to charge past the barrier and was incinerated. Orochimaru took a moment to check and make certain that the S-man hadn't been Naruto-kun, a cold sneer adorning his pallid visage when he saw his impetuous little kitsune still shivering in pain on the ground near the building's edge. Having that plan go sour as well would have been more than he could have tolerated. Still pretending to be a god, I see. I had hoped you might have learned something in the years since we last met, but it seems that you've disappointed me once more, student. However, I shall now enlighten you as well. Your scheme is doomed. Your secret alliance with the Hidden Sand has long been known to us, and our shinobi are in position. Your sooner conspirators will be ambushed and said well outside the village. The Snake Sannin almost scowled in irritation at Sarutobi's victorious smile, but mastered the urge, not wanting to give his opponent an inch. Somehow his secret plans had been compromised and leaked to Konoha. Orochimaru placed the sole blame on the incompetent Kazekage and his servants. The gruesome deaths would be no less than the imbeciles deserved. The serpent man glanced over the building's edge, noting that there was little carnage taking place outside the arena, and that the sole attackers present were otonin that had been mixed in with the civilian tourists prior to the exam, not enough soldiers to even make a noticeable dent on Konoha. The plan was a bust, but the Snake Sannin would not retreat now, not when he had isolated the Hokage. Orochimaru could still K that old peace-loving coot at least. And besides, Gaara-kun could wreak enough havoc with his sealed demon to bear Suna's weight in the attack on his own. With that in mind, the snake man sneered down at his old teacher. I see. Well, I'm certain our dear fourth Kazekage would have been most distraught to hear that, were he still among the living. As he mocked the old man, The snake Sannin removed the Kazekige's stolen hat and gave it a sidearm toss into the barrier, leering with a Cheshire grin as it burst into ashes. The third's eyes narrowed in anger at Orochimaru's callous attitude towards the other cages or perhaps in irritation that the serpent man hadn't seemed much too perturbed about his stratagem being countered. Either way, it would seem that the psychological battle is in my favor, Sarutobi-sensei. Your own men are sitting ducks out there without backup. You have lost, Orochimaru. The serpent grinned and laughed, angering his old sensei even more. Mere pawns like them are expendable. All these years you've continued to fester, and you still can't even comprehend that. You care about your tools, love them as though each was your own child. You cannot use Shinobi to their best like that. Such a useless village will be obliterated sooner or later. You will right here, Sarutobi-sensei, and I'll get what I desire no matter which side wins this little battle. And he would, the snake man mused with glee. Konoha or sooner, it mattered little which village became extinct. Either scenario would shatter the Britital power balance that had kept the wretched peace intact since the Great Shinobi Wars, and the whole continent would be plunged into chaos once more as the other villages attempted to take advantage. Orochimaru would be one real victor, even should Konoha exit the invasion unscathed. The moment the Sans Shinobi had encroached into Hino Kuni, the Snake Sannin's sinister aims had been assured. All that remained was to send Konoha into similar chaos now with its venerable Hokage's demise. The Sound Four then created inner barriers to surround themselves and thus guaranteed that the old baboon would not be able to escape his cage. Sarutobi also sensed that the critical moment had come, and the battle began. We'll soon see about that, Orochimaru. Your old sensei still has one last lesson to give. Ninpu, Kawara Shuriken. A dozen or so lacquered tiles sprang out where the Sandaime stood and spun at high speed towards the snake man. Orochimaru skilled at the feeble opening attack and concentrated chakra into his legs, leaping backwards and over the incoming missiles with casual ease. The snake Sannin let out a maniacal leer as he opened his mouth and his purple tongue emerged outward. Ha! That's not good enough, old man, not even close. Senejashu. The serpent shinobi's tongue morphed into a snake and struck downward at the Hokage. The aged leader was unable to react in time and the serpent sank its lethal bite into Sarutobi's at the exact same spot where Naruto-kun had received his Juin a month earlier. The old man grunted and grasped the snake behind the head, wrenching it loose while Orochimaru used the idle moment to ponder what might happen should he give his sensei a cursed seal. Too bad the old man had to now, as branding him as a slave was somehow more appealing to the snake man. The snake Sannin chuckled at his sensei's plight, dismissing his random brainstorm as he approached the ground again. So, even a weak attack like this gives you trouble now, it shows how old age can ravage a person. Orochimaru's voice was slurred due to his tongue being out, but his arrogant expression contorted into a venomous glower when the Hokage disintegrated into mud. The serpent man retracted the appendage into his mouth with a loud slurping sound, sliding his narrowed yellow gaze to the side to where the genuine Sarutobi stood waiting, aged hands coming together to complete a jutsu. You shouldn't count this old warrior out yet, whelp. Doton, Doryu Tiger. Orochimaru's sneer returned even as the Sandaime's mud river materialized underneath him and swept him across the ground. The snake man noted that the old man's version was much more potent than Naruto-kun's, which came as no real surprise, but it was still somewhat reassuring to know that 10 years hadn't made his sensei into a complete impotent. Still, the Doton technique had little impact on the snake Sannin other than soiling his purloined robes, as Orochimaru made no spirited attempt to resist the earth river and was carried along, all the while making hand seals in order to execute his counterattack. Ku, you're boring me, Sarutobi-sensei. Please tell me this isn't all you've got. The Sandaime's lips were compressed into a tight line, a severe look in his old eyes. Don't make me laugh, that was nothing but the start. Doton, Doryuden. The serpent man's mouth went slack when he realized that he'd been had. The mud at the river's base shaped into a large, open-mouthed dragon's head which soon spewed countless hardened and razor-sharp mud arrows towards Orochimaru, who was still mired to his waist in rushing mud and could not evade the incoming attack. The third Hokage stared over the blackened tiles and residual mud with an irritated expression. Kaiten, Koryuden. Sarutobi's third ninjutsu completed the attack, igniting the rock missiles in midair as the shards closed in on his ex-student. The snake Sanin shrieked in pain as the created incendiaries consumed him. The raging blaze charred his entire position even as more missiles struck, and Orochimaru was nowhere to be seen when it subsided. All that remained was blackened tile and baked mud. Stop this useless charade, Orochimaru. I know you're hiding down there, so come out. A chuckling sound sounded underneath the burnt ground as Orochimaru rose out. The serpent man lilted about with a swagger and gave a little mocking bow when he completed his entrance, glancing with amusement at the hawkish expression on his old sensei's visage. And to answer the Sandaim's challenge, the snake Sanin grabbed his collar and tore loose his stolen Kazekage robes, tossing them aside without care into the residual mud to reveal his own usual combat robes and purple rope sash. Well, all right, then. You're quite right, Sarutobi-sensei. We should cease with the games and get serious. I believe I've been underestimated a bit, unless you've grown senile and forgotten who I am. A combination like that could never even wound me. The Hokage crossed his arms with a snort, less than pleased with his student's antics. HMPH, it's about time you stopped posturing and messing around. Sarutobi then wrenched his ceremonial Hokage hat and robes loose as well, showing that he also was clothed to battle, wearing his black battle garb, complete with armored war helmet and gauntlet. Orochimaru's vile tongue sn out as he licked his lips in anticipation when his sensei sank into his low taijutsu stance. The serpent shinobi could have sworn he heard the old bastard's brittle bones creak in protest. You even came out prepared to s. I'm ever so delighted to see that. Coo. Sarutobi's proud and ancient visage crinkled into a grim smile, acknowledging the point. The snake Sanin became the least bit unnerved at this, but showed the Hokage nothing except the same cultured arrogance. Orochimaru still held his best card in his hand, and his kinjutsu would prevail over whatever tricks the old man had in his proverbial stabilities. Correct, Orochimaru. I am prepared to meet the Shinigami. And that is the precise reason you will never succeed in King Me here. You cannot win, because you are not willing to battle me with everything on the line. Come now, the time to talk has ended. Let us instead settle it all with our jutsu. The snake Sanin's grin widened in as an answer. Nothing suited him better. I will K you, Sarutobi-sensei. And don't expect me to give you an easier time because you're old, either. Both cage-level shinobi began concentrating their chakra in preparation. The air became inundated and thick with the vital substance and the yellow tiles underneath the pair began to crack and splinter with the resulting increase in pressure. This time, both Sarutobi and Orochimaru moved in unison, charging straight at one another and sealing. The cage's duel had now commenced in earnest. The Sandaime reached back into his long unused weapons pouch and retrieved a single shinobi star, tossing the metal shuriken towards his wicked pupil and continuing to run along behind it as he completed his jutsu. This is it, Orochimaru. I will now avenge all the lives your madness has taken. Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The heavy Senin's voice came out as an insane cackle, as the serpent man halted his rush. Not with that pathetic attempt, old man. Kuchio's, Edo Tensei. Sarutobi's one shuriken multiplied into hundreds as the snake Sanin completed his summoning jutsu and slammed both palms onto the tiled ground, creating a portal which spawned a single ornate wooden burial casket, and then another. The third Hokage's expression widened in recognition, and the old man made several seals and clenched his hands together in a single seal. The third summoned item emerged. I must stop the third one at least. Ha! Orochimaru watched in his protective position behind the two wooden caskets, which also served as a barrier against the Sandaime's shuriken barrage, as Sarutobi used the jutsu show technique to counter the last summon at its midpoint and banish it back into whence it had come. The summoning portal closed behind it. So, the third one failed, I see. Well, no matter. These two will be more than enough. The serpent man observed with glee as his mentor grimaced ever so little when the two caskets opened wide and spewed out smoke, and the two occupants emerged and slumped over. Both wore outdated samurai armor, one set red and the other blue. The red armored warrior had long black hair and a regular Konoha Haitai-8, while the blue shinobi had silver hair and red markings on his cheeks, with an open steel helmet engraved with the village crest. These revived champions were the Shodai Hokage and the Nadaime Hokage. Let's see how you overcome this obstacle then, you sentimental disgrace. The Sandaim's resolve never seemed to waver as he looked between his own two idols and mentors and the student who had disturbed their eternal rest and desecrated their legacies in summoning them to help him bring destruction to the village the two had created, but the serpent man could sense the old warrior's growing despair underneath his mask. Orochimaru relished in the pain that his actions brought to his old sensei. Now, let's begin this battle. First, however, I'll need these two to return to their proper selves. Please get prepared, Sarutobi-sensei. The snake shinobi kept his leering stare trained on the third Hokage as he reached within his robes and withdrew two special kunai with written seals attached. Holding on in each hand, Orochimaru inserted them inside his two resurrected minions' skulls, his sneer broadening as he activated the paper tags and a white substance began pouring into the two motionless shells, returning color to their skillen and reanimating them. Sarutobi's aged pupils widened and the old man could do naught but stare like a doe in the light when the reincarnated pair stood tall and Orochimaru placed his hands on their backs. The snake Sannin crowed with accomplishment when his sensei lowered his head and shed several agonized tears at the scene. You two, look so much like you used to now, this is more than I can bear to see. Ku, you can't even begin to understand this, the elation I gain in breaking your withered heart like so, the man I once called, sensei. I've prepared this little scenario so that you might learn. Allow me to teach you this once, Sarutobi-sensei. I hope you will be able to appreciate it as much as I have. With that comment, the Shodai and Nadaim began to advance on the Sandaim, emotionless predators stalking a wounded animal. The first took the lower route and made a headlong charge at Sarutobi while the second leapt onto the building's gable and moved to blindside the Sandaim on the high route. Pinpoint teamwork, as should be expected with the two brothers who had created and brought Konoha to its prosperous state. Orochimaru meanwhile was content to observe rather than lending support, ever the scientist setting experiments into motion and watching as his results panned out. And so the Hokage-level battle began a slow build towards its climax. XXXXXXXXXX. Meanwhile, Naruto and Yamato landed in near stereo on a thick tree limb deep within Konoha's barrier wood. Shino glided down onto a lower branch. The now substantial rain pouring down in a torrent made progress somewhat more treacherous than usual, but it was nothing the Anbu were unable to adapt to. The masked Naruto kneeled and continued to concentrate his attention on the ever-growing chakra signal straight ahead, as well as the bothersome several behind. We're gaining on him now, Teiko. I can sense his Yuki, not much, but it's there. The small team would overtake the Jinchuriki soon, no doubt. According to Shino and Yamato, the Sasuke's attack had incapacitated Gaara to the extent that Kankuro and Temari had been given no recourse other than to drag him along with them during their withdrawal, and his S-weight was sure to be slowing him down more than a little. That was good news, as the Anbu and Aburame were being pursued as well, and having to cope with that large squad as well as a raging Shukaku would be a tall order. Your senses are sharp. However, we're still no closer to shaking our pursuers either. Naruto and the others had recognized the tailing shinobi almost at once. There were 10 pursuit nins in all, 8 traveling together in a loose-knit group, with one behind in reserve, and a last, much stronger one meandering along the same general path, but not in proper accord with the other well-oiled unit. The masked demon container was inclined to believe that he was the little surprise Orochimaru had mentioned at the arena, and his minions were meant to isolate and contain Naruto until their stronger commander arrived. Hi. Our plan didn't work. Those shinobi must be hunter nin or something. The plan had been rather a simple one, as Yamato had wanted to increase his short-handed squad's pace and leave the pursuers behind, intercept and neutralize Gaara and then turn back again and ambush the Oto or Suna, whichever village the unit might turn out to represent, shinobi and hack them to pieces using their home terrain as an advantage. However, the hostiles had turned out to be much more skilled hunters than the senior Anbu had anticipated, and now the 3 Konoha nin were in a vice. We're at a crossroads. We can either stop and eliminate the pursuit now, which with us together shouldn't be too hard, and chance our targets escaping back to Suna, or worse, Gaara regaining consciousness and awakening Ichibi no Titanuki, or we can keep to the present course and risk ill being caught in a pincer attack when we catch him. Yamato's voice was low, so that Shino would not overhear. Naruto had no particular issue with this, never considering the genin to be an equal squad member to him or his Teiko to begin with. The Aburame was with them to serve a singular purpose, and needed to know nothing not pertaining to said role. Shino wasn't authorized to learn what Gaara was, about the Biju sealed within the late Kazekige's son. Either alternative would cause problems. Let me go back and greet our guests, then. Sabaku no Gaara is unconscious, and his two older siblings are about as skilled as low-level Chunin at best. You and I shouldn't both be needed to complete such a mission. Naruto made his suggestion as he concentrated on the strongest pursuer, sensing a certain evil chakra that he recognized as Orochimaru's bubbling within the other shinobi. The Anbu knew that the Snake Sannin was battling with the Sandaime back in the village, meaning that this person had to possess the serpent's chakra owing to a Juin like Naruto's own. For some reason that even he couldn't pin down, the vessel knew that this person was an opponent that he alone needed to battle. However, his more level-headed captain wasn't so inclined to agree with him. Request denied, Lieutenant. I won't send you alone into a meat grinder like that. You would be outnumbered 10 to 1. You will continue on ahead with Aburame-san and work to complete our mission, and I will remain here and handle the others. The rookie almost bristled, irritated with being protected in being assigned the easier task. Naruto understood that his Teiko was more experienced and much stronger than him, but mere common sense postulated that the one who could repress Biju should go to do so. Furthermore, there was something about this entire mission that smelled odd to the Jinchuriki now, like there had been some ulterior purpose in bringing him out here. While Naruto wasn't one to argue against orders in general, this time he was determined to go and meet Orochimaru's game. The masked shinobi had to prove that he could beat anything the snake man sent at him, and that he was stronger than anyone else with the cursed seal. Your skills are much more vital to the mission than mine are, Teiko. You alone can repress the main target in the worst-case scenario. I'm not positive I can even handle him without you. However, I've got more than enough power to crush all those weak gnats nipping at our heels. Leave the insects to me, it's the logical course. Naruto was certain that he could take down Gaara no matter what, to be honest, given the radical new powers that Orochimaru's Juin had granted him. However, the cold logic behind his argument seemed to resonate with his captain, who waited a moment and then nodded behind his mask. Or perhaps Yamato was giving in due to time running short and his having little interest in arguing the point. You do make a valid point. Alright then, you will go, but please remain cautious and evade needless riskills. Backtrack, ambush and neutralize the interlopers and then rendezvous with us again when it's done. We'll both mark our trails to that end. Naruto nodded and prepared to leave, but stopped short when he saw leaves swirling in his peripheral vision. Aburame Shino materialized next to him on the higher branch. The masked warrior took a moment to wonder whether the insect user had somehow overheard him speaking about sing bugs in his conversation with Yamato. Use caution, Naruto-san. There are those who would be saddened were you to s. The Anbu blinked, wondering whether there was someone out there who hadn't seen past his masked disguise. He could see how Shino had done it, as no parlor trick could render his chakra invisible to the Aburame Kikaichu. Naruto snorted, staring out into the pristine woods as he again prepared his exit. The insect user seemed to want to register something in his tone, but was unable to do so well. Stick to being silent and emotionless, Aburame. This sentimental garbage isn't suitable. I'll never accept being ked until I've reached the heavens above and become a real living legend. You remember that, Shino, and spread the word. The demon carrier vanished in red chakra with that, using the Akuma Shunshin to propel him onto a straight intercept course with the advancing pursuit shinobi. Naruto moved a respectable distance and stopped once he reached an ideal ambush spot, a small clearing in the woods. The Jinchuriki then set about placing a medium-level genjutsu over the zone, creating the illusion that the woods opened into a ravine, with a single bridge leading to the other side. The illusion technique caused a minor stirring in his cursed seal. Naruto put the matter aside, having bigger issues to be concerned with. Useless mortal. You're wasting time with these swine when Shukaku remains to s. The blonde almost groaned aloud as his constant companion aired his inevitable complaint with the change in situation. Meanwhile, he continued to go about his work, creating clones and setting them to work in building his little construct while he continued to observe the situation. His targets were coming nearer, and the masked shinobi could also sense more chakra signatures coming in a similar direction, along a route almost identical to the one that he, Yamato and Shino had taken. Their lower strengths indicated that the entire team was genin. You'll get your Biju war battle soon enough. Just think of this as a small appetizer. Gaara isn't much of a challenge to us now anyway. The demon couldn't disagree with Naruto, lest he admit that a lesser Biju could prove a match against his earth-shattering might. Instead, the Ninetales turned his grumbling towards a new target in hopes that his container would still abandon his scheme. Don't be foolish, Gaki. That one lead churl pursuing you is not to be underestimated. His chakra carries the serpent's taint. The carrier was prepared with an acknowledging response. I know he's powerful, and because of that, it would create problems to have him interfere with your battle. Help me K him first, and then your prey will be all yours. You shall have your aid, then. But be quick about it, human. My patience has limits. Naruto might have made a snide retort, but stopped as he sensed the hostiles closing in. The Jinchuriki moved onto a tree and studied his work, not the most elaborate or sophisticated trap he'd ever seen, but good enough given that he'd had mere minutes to work with. He dismissed his clones, as their work was done and he didn't care to have his position revealed. A moment later, 8 camo-garbed sound shinobi landed close to Naruto's ravine. The Otonin glanced around the scene and at the simple rope bridge. Their captain then took point and gave the bridge a rough shake, motioning his 7 subordinates to begin the crossing once he was convinced that it wouldn't break once moved upon. Naruto watched in his hidden position as all 8 shinobi including the leader began walking in a straight line on the ground, where the group believed there was a bridge, leaving no one behind to keep lookout due to being in a hurried rush to complete their mission. Such sloppy work, there was that old saying, something like haste makes waste. Oi, assholes, you're all headed in the wrong direction. I'm back here. The Otonin stopped in their tracks and whirled back around in an almost comical manner. Naruto had since abandoned his hiding place in the branches and now stood behind them on his bridge, with his assassination katatana unsheathed at his side. His victims likewise withdrew kunai and various other shinobi weapons, assured that their overwhelming numerical advantage would win the battle. Their lone opponent shook his masked head in amusement and sent out a moderate chakra pulse, almost wincing as the expenditure made his cursed seal burn, and broke his own genjutsu. Orochimaru's goons blinked and looked around as their surroundings and the ravine under them melted and revealed a small clearing, but soon turned their attention back to Naruto, who tilted his chameleon masked head and pointed his katatana towards the space behind them. The 3 sound shinobi who turned back gasped in horror at the sight that greeted them. The trees rimming the clearing had all been tied together with steel wire and littered with explosive notes. Escape was impossible and death was certain. Boom. The demon container made a clenching motion with his other hand and activated the tags all at once, creating a massive explosion that blew the trees into charred splinters and the imbeciles stuck between them to shreds, setting the surrounding area ablaze as well. The noise was loud enough to be heard back in Konoha, several kilometers in the distance. Naruto turned his head as heated blood and burnt tissue splashed onto his mask and painted the terracotta covering a spotted crimson color on one side. I'll have to thank Azuki later, to be certain. Yugao had gotten on Naruto's case something terrible weeks prior during a routine equipment check when she saw that he carried little shinobi tools on his person, liking to use his complex jutsu rather than sticking with the basics as much as possible. She had proceeded to all but drag him to a village arms supplier and make him restock. The Jinchuriki then heard another person landing in the branches behind him, halting his somewhat inappropriate musings given the bloodbath he'd caused a mere moment earlier. Naruto inclined his masked head, one side white and the other a bleeding red, and glanced over towards the 9th Otonin, the single reserve soldier. The man stared down with an incredulous expression in his eyes at the smoldering mess that had once been his recon team, and then with that and terror at the lone Konoha Anbu standing there prepared to add him to the death toll. The hired warrior's response was obvious. He ran. TCH, just a small fry. Not even worth wasting AS over. Naruto stood and shouldered his katatana, having no intention to pursue the sole survivor. Not that the masked shinobi's inaction did the man much good, as the demon vessel glimpsed a whitish blur and then saw his hapless nin's head landing on the ground and rolling towards him a moment later. The corpse crashed into the bushes, bleeding out to add still more blood and guts to the smoking and burning hodgepodge. Rather than sparing attention on the S-man, Naruto instead locked his masked gaze with a cold green stare. The silver-haired teenager who had decapitated the other man had landed in a crouch, holding a short blade that appeared to be a sharpened bone in one hand. Naruto's Juin pulsated in tune with the other shinobi's presence, pulling his attention to the black marking on the adolescent's chest. Then I was right, he does have the cursed seal. This ought to be interesting. Ming your own comrades, there are some lines even I'm not willing to cross. The Jinchuriki let out a mocking whistle as he spoke, taking in his opponent's appearance. He was lithe, almost girlish in build, garbed in robes and a purple sash similar to what Orochimaru had worn during their battle in the second exam. Naruto had overheard certain rumors in the past about the Snake Sannin's sordid habits and concluded that this teenager was suited to his preferences. That trash deserved his end, as do all shinobi who do not succeed in the duties. The demon vessel knew that this other shinobi was no average warrior. Orochimaru would not have bestowed his seal onto a weakling. Still, he wasn't concerned. Naruto had busted his ass in training and now he would have the chance to put it all to the test. Here in this cold October rainstorm he would earn his given place among the Anbu and prove all him doubters wrong. This time, his opponent would not hesitate to K him, wouldn't mess with him as the Snake Sannin had. No one would be coming to assist him as the Akatsuki had against Momoki Zabuza. Naruto was all alone, and nothing could have suited him better. And that makes you the snake's special surprise, I see. How disappointing, a shirtless little bee. I came expecting a warrior and I got a concubine. The Sound Warrior's expression became even colder. Naruto twirled his katatana in one hand and prepared to strike. Such attempts to rile me are crude and will gain you nothing. I have been sent here to execute you, Uzumaki Naruto. Orochimaru-sama has asked your immediate disposal. Your continued existence is a threat to his great ambitions. Naruto wondered about that, whether even his opponent believed that rubbish, given that the Snake Man had all but told him that he planned on converting the demon container over to his side, even though said Jinchuriki harbored no intention to accept. Another test, then, the Anbu recognized this battle as what it was. Orochimaru's assassin brought his sword arm perpendicular to his chest, allowing Naruto to watch as a sharp bone protruded outward through his wrist, and the lithe shinobi took his new weapon in his other hand, now wielding two identical bone swords. Some strange bloodline limit, the masked shinobi was certain. Then take a number, princess. The line to take me out stretches into Kumo and then some. But I'll K you now instead, since we've come to such an amicable agreement. And no worries either, sweetheart, Hokage-sama will make sure that Orochimaru will be right there to greet you in hell. Senei-jashu. Naruto removed his Anbu mask with his unoccupied hand and released his henge, revealing his real visage, spiked blonde hair and whiskular marks. He then hooked the covering onto his waist and let his shadow snakes loose on his nameless opponent. The silver-haired shinobi was more than game, gliding past the serpents with ease and leaping right at the blonde with his arms crossed and both bone sabers drawn back. He's a fast one, and a taijutsu specialist as well. Talk about a bad match. You are undeserving to wield Orochimaru-sama's techniques, weakling. Naruto almost snarled at the ease with which the Otonin had gotten past his attack as he brought his katatana to bear in order to block the incoming attack. The assassin made a crossing strike with both blades, but the blonde was able to intercept the attack and push him backwards, taking a wild swipe at his silver head that was likewise evaded but gave him enough time to retract his shadow snakes. TCH, you've got no idea what I can do. And give me your name, slave. I'll need to know what to have carved on the memorial. The Otonin took a moment to consider, but seemed to decide that telling would do no harm. The blonde meanwhile took the time to regroup and watch his opponent. Something wasn't right about him. Their battle was in the beginning phases but his breathing was labored as though he'd been going much longer. The phenomenon lasted but a moment, and then Orochimaru's servant regained control over his respiration. The exotic assassin readied his bone swords again and spoke in a cold and cultured voice. Kaguya Kimimaro. Learn it well, trash, it will be the last you ever hear. The teenager attacked again, closing in at a high speed and subbing at the sneering Naruto with one skeletal saber and then slashing downwards with the other. The blonde Anbu slid aside to avoid the S and shoved Kimimaro a step backward using his superior reach to make the slicing attack miss. The Otonin attempted to S him again but the Jinchuriki caught his wrist and delivered a solid punch to the other shinobi's head. Kimimaro's cranium snapped back with the impact, but the silver-haired warrior recovered with ease and moved as Naruto attempted to press his advantage with an elbow strike, countering with a rapid slash that got past the blonde's guard and tore along his sternum. The bone blade wasn't able to Naruto's mesh-augmented combat garb, but the pressure was still enough to create a shallow gash underneath. The Konoha nin leapt back and patted the spot a couple times, grinning at the stinging sensation and the slight wetness on his battle suit. That was weak. An attack like that might tickle me, but never hurt me. Kimimuro's expression darkened ever so little, and Naruto knew that his baiting taunts were beginning to get underneath the lithe assassin's skillen. His pale hands gripped tighter onto his bone swords as he charged towards the larger demon vessel. Then I suppose I'll have to get a little more serious. The blonde blocked the next strike barrage with his katatana, the longer steel blade somehow managing to keep pace with the two smaller weapons. Kimimuro seemed to be moving a little quicker than in his earlier assault, pressing the more resilient Naruto much harder and pushing him back towards the still burning trees. Several exchanges passed as such, with the blonde having precious little time to mount a counterattack or utilize a jutsu. And yet he wasn't losing the battle. Kimimuro's attacks soon began to slow and become less precise, and Naruto could hear his breathing beginning to become labored again whenever the two neared one another. Frustration was starting to mount on the assassin's visage as his target managed to remain strong under his assault. The two moved opposite one another to regroup and then clashed again in unison, the whiskered blonde's well-made katatana colliding against his opponent's two worn bone sabers. For all his impeccable speed and technique, Kimimuro was at a stark disadvantage in pure strength, and Naruto shoved him back a good distance with a grunt and a push against his katatana, breaking their stalemate and indulging in a sinister chuckle over his would-be curse condition. Kimimuro was tiring, it was plain to see. The light rain continued to pour down in the woods, the water availing little against the raging blaze around them. You're looking a wee bit exhausted there. Tell me when you need to take a break, now. Be silent, trash. This is a serious battle, not an adolescent shoving match. Naruto sneered at the repetitive insult. Trash, and garbage, seemed to comprise his whole verbal arsenal. Kiba could have taught the little sweetie a thing or 100. The pale teenager bit out a snarl and sprang at Naruto with his blades extended. The container's snide comments and mocking tone had done their work. Kimimuro's simmering anger caused him to telegraph the attack, not much given its considerable speed, but enough that the blonde was able to see past it. The blonde swept well to the side and allowed the Otonin to lunge past him. The two, Naruto and Kimimuro, were similar in that respect. Both maintained cold and calculating maskels, but kept hot-blooded emotions bottled underneath. The blonde needed to make good whatever advantages he could, as his chakra was more or less bound lest he surrender ground to the cursed seal. Even concentrating chakra to boost his movements made the damn thing stir, and the most basic jutsu brought it closer to reactivation. Well now, that wasn't too bright. Senejashu. Naruto's shadow snakes coiled around Kimimuro's waist and right arm, making him lose his grip over a bone sword. Meanwhile, the blonde's Juin spiked in pain once again as he called upon his chakra to execute the technique. The Jinchuriki hissed and stuck his katatana into the ground, allowing him to grab onto the assassin's long silver hair with that hand and wrench him backwards while retracting his serpents in order to stop the pain. He could feel the seal stirring now, moving to activate once more. Naruto would not use Orochimaru's vile power unless he had no recourse, would not become reliant on that man's wicked schemes. The blonde's leg lashed out and kicked behind Kimimuro's patella, sending him to the ground on his knees. As soon as his snakes were back within him, Naruto grabbed his blade again and held it high, preparing to behead him with an execution stroke. He remembered that he had ked Haku in almost the same manner. His episode in Sakai now seemed like ages ago, though not much real time had passed. Looks like I'll be the one disposing you, Kimi Haim. Sayonara. The Biju container swung down in a wide arc, wanting to make his K an artistic one. Kimimuro had other plans, as he swiveled in the blonde's hold and brought his loose arm around, now unbound with the snake hand's withdrawal. Several razor-sharp bones emerged, creating a gauntlet around the assassin's wrist that intercepted the katatana and intertwined around it, locking the blade and then continuing on their outward path to impale Naruto. The Jinchuriki glowered and restitled the katatana into the earth, thus pinning both shinobi in place. However, Orochimaru's soldier espered back using his second bone saber, causing the larger blonde shinobi to release his grip on Kimimuro's hair and stare with a shocked expression into the bone sword now buried to the handle within his abdomen. The Oto Nin's ice-cold expression held a vindicated glint as a little blood cascaded down his chin, one that vanished as the wounded Naruto exploded into smoke, leaving the bone saber impaled into a wooden log. The silver-haired warrior gave a contemptuous snort at his opponent's tactics. HMPH, Kawarimi. Basic tricks like this will not be enough to best me, garbage. The blonde's retort came as a shuriken barrage, with him now standing on a low tree branch. Kimimaro attempted to pull his gauntlet over to block the throwing weapons as he had with the katatana a moment earlier, but was unable to wrest it loose. His lip curled into a tight scowl and he instead raised his other hand level, aiming the pale appendage into the incoming shinobi stars towards Naruto, who remained standing in the same position on his perch with an unconcerned expression. Teshi Senden. Kimimaro's distal phalanges exploded through his hands and screamed towards the incoming shuriken. The hardened bone bullets scattered the light shinobi stars aside with little resistance and shot right into Naruto's position. The blonde was too late in moving to avoid the attack and a bullet grazed against his cheek as he abandoned his perch, creating a rough wound that intersected his viscular marks on that side in a semi-straight line. Kimimaro's missiles blasted the tree Naruto had been standing on into pieces, raining small wooden splinters around the area and causing the broken remnants to tumble towards the ground. The blonde cursed under his breath and rolled aside to avoid being crushed underneath the wreckage while his opponent gripped his katatana's handle and wrenched it loose, liberating his pinned arm. The Oto Nin then somersaulted back as Naruto came rushing in with a leaping crossover kick. Kimimaro landed in a crouch, still wielding the blonde's assassination katatana in one hand, while the Jinchuriki likewise grabbed the Orochimaru shinobi's bone saber. An interesting little bloodline, a shame I'm going to make it bleed out here. The demon container then chucked the hardened weapon back at its creator, sending the bone blade whirling through the air. Kimimaro glared and tossed his remaining bone saber straight like a kunai. The two clashed in midair and both scattered aside in opposite paths, one embedding into a tree trunk and the other landing on the wet ground. Naruto groused in his mind over how roundabout his tactics were proving, as he would much rather go all out with his jutsu and reduce Kimimaro to cinders, but wasn't able to adopt his approach without the Juin even now pulsing on his end going nuts. There had to be some important reason behind the Hokage ordering him never to use the seal's power. Kimimaro seemed to be holding his seal's power back as well. Not like he's known about some of the other powers I've used in the past either. Naruto moved aside as a second bullet barrage came streaking at him. Kimimaro had used the same hand as in his initial shot, which showed the consternated blonde that his silver-haired opponent was able to both manipulate his skeletal structure and also to regenerate his lost bones at will. Kimimaro's Kekkei Genkai granted him a bottomless munitions cache. The assassin was a genuine living weapon. The bone missiles hit the earth and caused wet soil to explode into the air. Naruto used the Akuma Shunshin to move behind the Oto Nin. Kimimaro whirled about and swung the blonde's Black Ops katatana at its owner, who rather than evading the strike, caught the sharp blade in his hand right as the weapon began its sweeping arc. Naruto winced at the sensation, steel biting into his skeleton and muscle and scraping against his bone. He'd been espered deeper in the past, however, and was able to bear the pain. You're not lacking in resolve, Uzumaki Naruto, a proper soldier. However, another bone saber emerged through Kimimaro's skeleton, and the Oto Nin took it in hand. Naruto saw some genuine appreciation budding in the other shinobi's cold emerald gaze, acknowledging the blonde as being a worthwhile opponent. That meant nothing to the Jinchuriki. The Kyuubi vessel respected the other's skills to some extent, but genuine appreciation in a mortal combat was too ridiculous to even consider. I must end this battle right now, in order to meet Orochimaru-sama's wishes. The blonde shinobi sensed the blade moving towards his unguarded side, and pressed into Kimimaro so that the saber missed and met nothing save the humid air behind his back. Too close, the demon container could hear Kimimaro's rasping breaths that showed how exhausted he was. The whole thing made no sense. No shinobi, much less one skilled and experienced enough to be considered a leader in Orochimaru's organization, should have such piss-poor conditioning. Naruto wasn't about to complain about the advantages that it gave him, however. I'll credit that old snake with one thing though. He's got his men trained like animals. Naruto's head was relaxed parallel to Kimimaro's as he spoke in a low voice. He squeezed down in his katatana blade, pushing its edge even harder into his raw tissue. Blood poured out in a crimson river through his palm, traveling down the curved weapon's length and pooling on the earth. Kimimaro redirected his bone saber and made to puncture the Konoha nin in the lung, but the blonde shinobi grappled him and moved him into a position that would not allow him to bend his arm in the needed motion. And then, pathetic hound. Naruto then set his head into Kimimaro's mouth, using his Hitai 8 as a weapon. His attack stunned the other shinobi long enough to allow the blonde to nail him with a vicious thrust kick, sending him skilleting backwards as well as cracking several ribs with a noticeable crunching sound. The Oto nin's hand had tensed and released the katatana when he had been struck with the headbutt, and Naruto allowed it to hit the ground, snatched the weapon in his other hand, returning it to its sheath with a rapid motion. While Kimimaro still struggled to regain his bearings, a task made arduous due to his odd weariness, the blonde extended both arms and commanded his shadow snakes to emerge a last time. 8 serpents emerged and bound the assassin's arms and legs tight, also coiling around his waist and en. Without giving Kimimaro time to pull out another bone manipulation trick, Naruto cast the Oto nin across the clearing and slammed him well into the burning zone and through a still smoldering tree. The weakened wood snapped into pieces with the impact and brought several other trees down with it, entombing Orochimaru's warrior in a hellish avalanche. Buried alive beneath the snake's sick ambitions, it's a suitable end, garbage. Naruto snorted at his own philosophical musings as he strode over to the wreckage. The blonde could sense a certain wicked presence beneath the burnt wood and ash, but assumed that it was the evil chakra in Kimimaro's cursed seal vaporizing into the air with his death. Now that his battle was over, he cast his attentions towards where Yamato and Shino had gone. Shukaku's Yuki signature was stronger than earlier, indicating that the Biju was getting closer to awakening, and that his captain hadn't caught Gaara. Well done, brat. You killed that little churl without wasting our chakra or depending on that mark. You have made much progress since that sniveling little Gaki who could accomplish nothing without my intervention. Naruto smiled a little at the comment. Though the demon's words still held a certain condescending undertone, it was as close as his tenant would come to handing out praise. The Jinchuriki examined the gash on his palm where he had gripped his katatana blade. Holding a weapon would prove bothersome until it healed over some, though he wasn't inclined to think that a mere sword would prove much use against Sabaku no Gaara or whoever else he would be going against next. Arigato, but even so, I think I'm beginning to hate sealing jutsu in general. The fourth seal and now this, both were irritating as hell. At the core, however, Naruto wasn't so bothered with the Yondaim's last work. He might have been happier as a normal person, but he would never have become as strong as he was with it. Shinobi renowned throughout the entire continent knew his name because he was a chosen vessel. Sarutobi and Orochimaru, Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame, Uzumaki Naruto would not even exist to these men as some average Gaki. Their attention was sometimes bothersome, more than that in the Snake Sanen's case, but it was nonetheless narcotic. Enough talk. We will proceed to Shukaku's location at once. Naruto nodded within his mind and prepared to leave. The blonde then heard something sinister emerging in the wreckage behind him, a presence that almost made him shiver. Turning around to look wasn't even needed, though he still did so. Leaving would not be so simple, it seemed. Do not leave so soon, Uzumaki Naruto. We are not through here. As expected, Kimimaro stood among the wreckage, holding a hand against his cracked ribcage. His skillen was scorched and bruised in several places. The jun on his chest glowed as lines began spreading in a square-like pattern to cover him. The assassin had activated his cursed seal. Kimimaro's head was bowed and he glared into Naruto's soul with a maddened gaze that looked more like Gaara's than his own, blood oozing out his mouth and pulling on the burnt mess below him. And the monster rises even stronger right when the hero thinks he's won, how cliché. Naruto sighed as he spoke, to which his revived opponent made no comment. Kimimaro extended one hand, allowing his target to observe as a sharp bone emerged through his palm and continued outward, turning his entire right arm into a halberd-like weapon. The Oto nin's other arm remained as it was, and the blonde assumed that this was to allow him to retain the ranged combat abilities that the Teshi Senden presented. Similar armored bone attachments proceeded to sprout within Kimimaro's shoulders and elbows as well as his knees. Naruto's earlier, living weapon, description had now become much more apt. Hey, I think this encounter just got a little bit more dangerous. The carrier Takubi no Kitsune grimaced and prepared to enter combat once more, now aware that this would present his most perilous challenge to date. Whatever Orochimaru's game was, he was cursing the snake over having involved him in it. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.